Hi, I'm Michelle Jorgensen, and this is a Mount Mahogany Steak Self-Reliance training video. This month we're going to talk about long-term food storage. I hope you caught last month's video about short-term food storage. They're different things. The church says to start with short-term food storage because that is food that we will use on a daily basis and we can use if something short-term happens in our lives. But they've also counseled that once we get that short-term food storage in place, that we start to work on long-term food storage. This is the part that you've probably heard most about. As we've talked about food storage through the years in the church, we always talk about wheat and rice and oats and those kinds of things. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you use that today, how you store it, how much you need to store, the things you can't store, hopefully some things that you haven't heard about long-term food storage, because I know this is kind of something we've been beating for a long time. So I think you're going to learn some different things today. I heard a quote recently that I really liked. It said that the best defense for hunger is food. So think about that. It's kind of funny. The best defense for hunger is food. So hunger is a big deal. If we honestly most of us probably haven't ever experienced hunger. I know that I really haven't experienced true hunger. Sure, I'll say, oh, I'm hungry on Fast Sunday, I'm hungry. But I don't think I've really ever truly experienced hunger. And it would be a very new thing for all of us to really experience that. So the best defense for that is going to be food. So let's talk about how to store it. One advantage about storing food is that you can always eat it. So it's not like something that's going to expire and go away and it was useless for you to put your money into it. You can always eat the food. The other advantage of storing food is that I have never yet seen prices go down on food. So if I store food today, you can pretty much be guaranteed that 5 years from now, the food that I store today is going to be more expensive 5 years from now. So prices go up. So this is a good investment for your money as well, because inflation goes up, your food storage is still there. When would we use this kind of food storage? You know the answers to this, but I want you to think about a couple of different situations. Perhaps a long-term job loss. Maybe you're out of work for 6 months and you need food and you don't have a lot of money coming in and you need something to survive on. This is a little different one. What if there is a large-scale catastrophe somewhere outside of where we live? Maybe in California. Maybe they have a drought. This is something that's actually happening right now, right? Maybe they have a drought and our food supply is cut off. What if the transportation system totally shuts down because of some kind of civil unrest somewhere else outside of where we even live? If we can't get food, if you can't get food tomorrow from your grocery store and can't for the next few months, what are you going to do? Are you going to have food on hand to be able to take care of that situation? So it may be that we don't have some kind of a disaster here. Maybe it's a disaster away from us that influences whether we are able to get food or not. A lot of stores, their turnaround is a day. That store would be emptied in a day's time. What if it's months before those trucks start to go again? So you need to think about those kinds of things. Those are the reasons you would use it. The other key behind food storage is you need to have layers. And I know that this part can be overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. You need to have layers of food storage. That's why we started with short-term food storage. That's one layer. Water storage is another layer. This now is long-term food storage. These are foods that are shelf stable for 10 to 30 years if stored properly. Now, the storing properly part is at room temperature or colder in a low moisture situation. So you don't want this to be somewhere that's real humid, real moist, because they're not going to last as long in that situation. But these are foods that are going to last a very long time. The other layer is you really do want to have some foods that will last a long time but that are easy to use. So my husband often jokes, I said this on the last video, but it's so true, that if I'm not around to know what to do with these big old buckets of grain, he's going to starve to death. So part of our long-term food storage also includes these types of items. These are add water only things that he could open up this package, he could add water to this, and he could make multi-grain cereal for our family. So it's important to have some kind of items like this as well that you can easily make in a long-term situation. So let's talk a little bit about some options and some ideas. This one I don't think you can see, but I'm going to bring it up here. It's really heavy. Or maybe we'll swing the camera over that direction. So this is called Scotch broth. This is the simplest, easiest thing you could make for long-term food storage. And I will put the recipe on the steak newsletter site under lds.org for Scotch broth. This is enough food for one person for a year. If I had 2 of these buckets, this is enough for one person for a year. This was $200. So for less than $200, I can feed one person for a year. Now, would I get sick of eating this? You better believe I'd get sick of eating this, but you know what? I would live. It would be better than dying. So I think that this is worth doing if you can do nothing else. Just get a few buckets. I have 5 of these buckets. This could last, I found, for quite a while. All it is a mixture of very nutritious beans and grains. And it has instructions in here for how to cook it. Everything is self-contained in this bucket. So if an emergency ever happens, we could open this bucket. We could eat on this for a long time. So that's a simple thing. Check out that recipe on the Word newsletter. Okay, other storage options. Obviously, you've all seen the big 5-gallon, 6-gallon buckets. The important thing about these is that they must be oxygen, they must have some kind of oxygen inhibition. You don't want oxygen getting to your food. So as long as the oxygen can't get in here, this grain is going to be able to be stored long term. Typically when they do it in these large buckets, they use dry ice to do that. So it's a little harder to do it on your own. You can find instructions online, however, to do it on your own if you want to know how to do that. One thing I do recommend if you have some of these big buckets is to get something like called a gamma seal lid or gamma lid, because when you're using this, I don't know how many fingernails I've broken off trying to pry these lids off of these buckets. So this lid is the most wonderful invention in the whole world. It's still a lid, but this just screws off. And now I can access the grains inside of this. So even if you just store 1 or 2 of those, then you'll be able to pop those onto your buckets when you're actually using them. And that's what I use on a daily basis when I'm using any grains at home. Okay, everybody's seen the ubiquitous number 10 can. Everybody knows what it looks like. These are easy to store, they're easy to transport. Although if you ask my parents, they're not easy to transport because they've moved me a couple times and they cuss a lot when they move all of my number 10 cans. But you know what? They can be moved. They're easy to store, they are airtight, they're moisture tight. These really are a perfect storage scenario. Another option is a Mylar bag. A Mylar bag, you have to have oxygen absorbers inside of a Mylar bag to make sure you keep the oxygen out. The bags and the oxygen absorbers can be found at the Home Storage Center. There's one in Linden. You can find all of these things for doing your own storage if you'd like, or you can just buy the ones that they've already made for you, which is even easier. So those are all just different storage options. Some things you can't get from the Home Storage Center that I recommend storing, things like honey. This is going to turn rock hard, but it will still be honey, even though it's rock hard. It's going to be a little harder to use, but this is absolutely usable for a long, long, long time. This is kind of God's way of storing sugar right here. So there's some things that you need to get that are outside of just the Home Storage Center. Some things that can't be stored long-term, and this is important to know. And these are reasons why we don't have some of these things in our long-term storage. So nuts. Nuts have a lot of oils in them. Anything that has oil in it does not store as well long-term. So I store these in my freezer to have a lot on hand. Obviously, if electricity goes out, this is the first thing that's going to go. These won't spoil overnight, but they're not going to last me 10 to 30 years. So I do have these stored, but I store them in a different way. Things like brown sugar, granola, these don't store long-term. So these are kind of part of your short-term food storage that you rotate and you use if you use these items. Dehydrated eggs, again, another storage item that has oils in it. It won't store long term, but they're good to have, and I use these for baking. So they're good things to have on hand. Dried fruits and vegetables are not long-term storage worthy unless when you bend them, they snap. That's the rule. You have to bend them and they have to snap when you bend them. Otherwise, they have too much moisture to store long-term. Those aren't foods that you don't want to have in storage. You want these things in your storage, but just don't depend on them in long-term. Let's talk about brown rice. People ask me all the time, gosh, well, I never eat white rice. How come the only thing I ever store is white rice, right? The reason is that whole grain rice has a lot of oils in it as well, and it goes rancid. So for long-term storage, 10 to 30 year storage, you're going to want to store white rice. I know you may eat brown rice, and I have brown rice in my home. We keep it in one of these big buckets, and it's the thing that we rotate through and we use it. But white rice is what's in my storage because 30 years from now, it's still going to be usable for me. So that's why we store some of those things. You can use whole grains in storage. Like this is whole rye. I have whole wheat, whole oats, a whole bunch of different grains, and they're fine long term, but not the rice. Okay, recipes. That is something that people always struggle with. They say, okay, I don't eat these things normally. I have no idea how I'm going to use them. So good news for you. I have a digital copy on the Steak Ward newsletter site, a digital copy of a cookbook, food storage cookbook. It is extensive, and it has everything in there that you're ever going to want to know. So the couple ways you can handle it, There's actually a Copytech in Pleasant Grove. The file is on file at Copytech. If you call them up and say, I want the Mount Mahogany cooking, food storage cookbook, they'll say, great, and it'll be all bound and ready for you to go. You can print it off yourself if you want. You can pick and choose recipes out of there you want. My most favorite section is the very first section, and it's food storage only recipes, meaning the recipes in there only use these things. Because it always bothers me when I open a food storage recipe and it says to use cream cheese. And I think, well, why would I ever have cream cheese in my long-term food storage? There's no way I can make that recipe. So all of the recipes in that first section only use these items. So if you're struggling to know how to use them, make sure you have that book stored with your food so that if you have to use the food, you can use it. There's a few other things that you really need to store. You have to store ways to use these foods. So baking soda, baking powder, yeast, these items need to be part of your storage. Otherwise, you're going to have a real hard time making bread. Because flour and water, you can do a sourdough bread, it's true. It's just a lot harder. You're going to have a harder time making baked goods. You're going to have a harder time making things taste good. The other thing you want to store is bouillon, spices, these kinds of things to make that endless supply of beans and rice actually edible. So make sure you have some of these stored as well. This is one thing that people don't think about. We have recommendations for how much salt to store, but I think we should be storing about 20 to 50 pounds per person of salt, and I'll explain why. Salt is important for us for food, to make food taste good, but salt is a preservative. And so if you are in a long-term emergency situation, and we're going to be talking next month actually about gardening, and you're starting to garden and you're starting to grow some fresh vegetables and you need to store those long term, salt is the only way to make that happen. So salt is a very important storage item, not just for taste, but for preservation. So make sure you have a lot of salt, and iodized and non-iodized. Non-iodized is what's necessary for preservation. Iodized is necessary to keep you to have iodine in your body. So you actually need a little bit of both. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is what in the world do you do with all that wheat you have stored? You have buckets and buckets and buckets of wheat. You don't use it on a daily basis. What in the world are you going to do with it? Well, you can make wheat meat, which is kind of soaked wheat. You can make wheat berries. You can do some things like that. But if you actually want to make bread, you have to have a way to grind it. So this is just a simple wheat grinder. Please just store a wheat grinder. You can get a very inexpensive one, and it doesn't cost very much, and you're going to be so happy you have it. It will help build biceps in any emergency. That's what I think kids are for, is to grind this wheat. So hopefully we're going to have lots of kids around so they can grind the wheat, because it's going to take all day long. That's what women used to do. They would take all day to grind their grains. So hopefully this will speed up the process so we're not using stones against stones to grind our wheat. The other thing you're going to need is ways to cook it. So store a couple bread pans, even if you don't make bread now. Big pots, you're going to need big pots. I was actually kind of inspired to buy some big pots. We use them now too, but I think that things are going to be made in bigger quantities, because when you're making beans or you're making something like this that takes a long time to soak, you're going to want to make a lot of it. So make sure that you have a couple of pots on hand as well. So hopefully those are a few different ideas that you hadn't thought of for long-term food storage. The question that everybody always asks me is, how much do I need? So I'm going to put an online calculator on the website, on that newsletter site again, so that you can figure out for your family how much you need. Don't go on there and get overwhelmed. Don't look at that and think there is no way I can do that. Even if all you do today is make a couple buckets of Scotch broth, you go to Winco, you buy every single ingredient, including the bucket, for less than $200, do that. If that's all you do. So this month, that's what I want you to do. I want you to just think about, how can I start my long-term food storage? If you already have long-term food storage, you don't have a clue what it is or what to do with it, then I want you to organize it. I want you to go in there, I want you to actually take a tally. How many things of wheat do I have? Do I have a wheat grinder? Okay, great, I'm gonna be great there. How much rice do I have? What kind of rice do I have? Just take a tally, see what you have, get familiar with what you have, so that if you are in a long-term emergency, you'll know what to do and you'll know what you have. And you may find that you're short on a few things like this. So make sure you have the items like this that will help you use the food that you have stored. So that's long-term food storage. This month is the month to do that. So make it your goal and get on top of your long-term food storage this month. Next month, we're going to be talking about how to grow our own food. We'll see you next month. Thank you.